Welcome back, Night Wanderer. Tonight you're not just drifting into sleep, you're crossing a threshold. Into a past not gilded with fairy tales, but haunted with secrets. A story wrapped in velvet, blood and rust. A tale of kings, betrayal, superstition, and one object that may, or may not, have claimed the lives of 7 monarchs across centuries. A crown. Not just any crown, but one that was whispered about in candlelit chambers, feared in the shadows of thrones, and locked away more than once, only to return again when ambition overpowered caution. This is the story of the cursed medieval crown that killed 7 kings. Some say it was forged from the metals of a fallen angel's blade. Others say it was touched by the last breath of a dying saint, or a dying sorcerer. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Every king who wore it died. And not just died, they suffered. War, madness, betrayal, disease, fire, the kind of deaths that made even the most faithful man wonder, is this the wrath of God, or something far older? So before we begin our journey, I invite you to do one small thing. If you find yourself returning to these tales again and again, if you've ever fallen asleep to the whisper of the past echoing through your headphones, tap the subscribe button. It's the simplest way to say, tell me another story. And now, draw the blanket up to your chin, dim the light, let the ancient air of stone chambers fill your lungs. Because we begin, not with a coronation, but with a funeral. The year was 912 AD. The land was fractured, and the king was dying. King Alaric of Westmore was not a man of peace. His reign was marked by the steel edge of conquest, but he was also paranoid. He feared betrayal from every angle, even from the gods. So when he commissioned a new crown for his coronation, he didn't ask a royal jeweler, or the church. He asked a blacksmith named Gorin. Gorin was different. He lived alone, worked only at night, and never touched silver. But his metalwork was unmatched. He claimed he could forge a crown that would bind a king to his throne, as surely as iron binds a gate. The crown he made was stunning, burnished gold with deep red garnets that looked like frozen drops of blood. But what no one knew was that the gold was mixed with something else. Something Gorin had smelted in secret. A piece of a fallen meteorite he had found in the woods. It hummed when heated, whispered, even, as if alive. Alaric wore the crown with pride. For 7 days. On the 8th he went mad. He stood at the balcony of his keep, eyes wild, whispering about voices in his ears and shadows that crawled. Then he turned his sword not on his enemies, but on his wife, his priest, and finally, himself. The crown was retrieved from the bloodied floor. Locked away. But not for long. A monk's record found later reads, he wore the sky in gold, and it spoke until he could bear it no more. They called it the crown of ash and blood. And though it was hidden, history has a way of unearthing what should stay buried. The crown vanished for nearly a century, until 1021, when it resurfaced in the unlikeliest of places, a reliquary beneath Ely Cathedral. No one knew how it had gotten there, perhaps smuggled by monks, perhaps hidden by those who feared it, but the bishop overseeing renovations at the time found it, gleaming beneath dust and bone fragments, still pulsing with strange warmth. And he gifted it to the new king of the Angles, Edmund II, a pious man, but young and eager to be seen as chosen. When he was crowned with the ancient diadem, there were murmurs among the clergy. Some recognized the red garnets, but no one dared object. The king had spoken. For 5 months, all was well. Then came the fire. On a cold February night, Ely Cathedral was set ablaze. The stone structure should have withstood the flames, but the fire behaved like a living thing. It climbed, coiled, and devoured. Witnesses swore the smoke formed faces. Screams echoed not from the burning, but from something else inside. King Edmund tried to help. But as he entered the nave to rescue relics, a flaming beam fell, not randomly, but directly where he stood. When his body was recovered, the only thing untouched by flame was the crown. A monk's diary entry reads, the fire fled every holy thing, but chased the king as if drawn by breath. It was then that rumors began to turn into belief. A second king dead, both under mysterious violent ends, both wearing the same crown. Still, it would not be the last. The crown, after the Ely fire, was again hidden. But this time, not in a church. It was spirited away by a noblewoman named Lady Maud of Evershall, a quiet widow with deep ties to both clergy and court. She believed the crown was not cursed but sacred, that its power was misunderstood. For decades it sat in a locked coffer beneath her estate. Her journal, later found by her great-granddaughter, describes visions and dreams. It whispers, she wrote, but not always of death, sometimes of destiny. In 1137, civil war tore England apart, the period later known as the Anarchy. Lady Maud's descendant, Lord Reginald of Evershall, desperate for leverage, offered the ancient crown to King Stephen. Stephen, embattled in a war with Empress Matilda, was wary of relics, but the crown's beauty and ancient lineage were too tempting. He believed it would unite the nobles behind him, giving him the air of divinely sanctioned rule. He was crowned, privately, in a side chapel, by torchlight. And for a time his luck turned, but slowly, something else crept in. Witnesses wrote that King Stephen began forgetting things, names, faces, places. Then came the hallucinations. He claimed to see the former kings, Alaric and Edmund, standing at the foot of his bed, drenched in blood and fire. He began muttering in languages unknown to his court, retreating into dark corners of the palace. In the final weeks of his life he forbade anyone from entering his chamber, save for a boy who played a lute. He said the music kept the crown's voice quiet. When Stephen died, the boy ran screaming into the courtyard. The crown breathed, he shouted. It leaned down to him like it was kissing him. And then he stopped moving. The crown was found beside the body. No blood, no signs of struggle, just silence, and a single garnet missing. They buried it with him, in a hidden crypt beneath Winchester. Or so they thought. Nearly a century passed. Europe shifted. Kings rose and fell as did empires. But in 1222, across the English Channel, a knight on pilgrimage to Canterbury discovered something strange among the relics displayed at a ruined monastery. A crown, dusted with age, one of the garnets missing. He brought it home, to Burgundy. The Duke of Burgundy at the time, Philip the Boar, was known for his ferocity in battle and his disdain for religious relics, but when he saw the crown, something changed. He was enthralled. He demanded it be melted down and refashioned with the crest of Burgundy. But every attempt failed. The crown would not melt. The metal resisted flame as though it were alive. One blacksmith claimed the crown hissed at him. So the Duke relented. He wore it during ceremonies, parades, even hunts. He said it made him feel like Caesar reborn. But soon, his men noticed changes. Philip became crueler, not just to enemies but to his own soldiers. He began executing men for imagined slights. He slept in armor. He claimed his brother was plotting against him, though his brother had died years prior. Then came the feast, a grand banquet held for lords from across the region. That night the Duke gave a toast, then collapsed, frothing at the mouth, eyes wide, choking on words no one understood. He died within minutes. But not before screaming, "It's mine! You cannot take it! I wore it first!" The crown was removed and cast into a nearby river. 3 days later, the river flooded, the worst in Burgundy's recorded history. A local priest wrote, "The waters rose not from rain, but wrath," as if the crown pulled the land down with it. Some believed it was lost forever. They were wrong. 1347. Venice. A city of masks, markets, and mirrors. The richest trade hub in Europe, glittering like a jewel on the Adriatic Sea. But beneath its beauty, the city trembled. Word had spread of a sickness, a pestilence from the east. The Black Death had begun its long, silent march toward Europe. And yet, in the palace of Doge Lorenzo Albiani, a discovery was made that momentarily distracted from the dread. A shipwreck had been found in the lagoon, a vessel thought to be lost for decades. Among the rotted crates and corroded cargo was a locked chest, sealed with a strange red wax, marked by an unfamiliar sigil. Inside, an ornate crown with 6 garnets. No one knew how it had come to rest in the water, but the Doge, fascinated by foreign treasures, took it as an omen. His advisors urged caution. The crown was warm to the touch. One man claimed it whispered in his dreams. Another went blind after trying it on in secret. But Lorenzo ignored the warnings. He declared that Venice, unlike the rest of Europe, would not fall to fear. He would be crowned anew, with the relic of destiny. The ceremony was held privately. The crown was placed upon his head at midnight. And then, the rats came. Within a week the plague reached Venice. Bodies fell in the streets. Entire families vanished. Ships burned in the harbor. But the most curious thing of all, Lorenzo did not die immediately. Instead, he lingered, pale, listless, gaunt, but alive. Whispers spread that the crown had preserved him. Others believed it was feeding on him slowly. The Doge stopped eating. He would stare for hours at the crown in the mirror. "It speaks," he muttered, but not in words. He died after 49 days. His body was strangely preserved. No swelling, no rot. The crown was nowhere to be found. Some say it was sealed in a plague tomb beneath the basilica. Others believe it walked out of the palace on its own. Either way, a fifth ruler had fallen. The year was 1481. Spain was on fire, not from war but from fear. The Spanish Inquisition had reached its full, terrible height. Heresy, blasphemy, and witchcraft were the crimes of the day. And no one was safe. In Seville, Grand Inquisitor Mateo de Rojas heard of a relic recovered from a burned abbey, an ancient crown, said to be tied to demons, preserved miraculously in the ashes. It had survived 3 fires, 6 deaths, but the Inquisition didn't fear cursed items. They saw them as proof, and Rojas saw an opportunity. He offered the crown to King Fernando II as a gift of loyalty. He claimed it had belonged to the first Christian kings and would offer divine protection against the spread of heresy. Queen Isabella was uneasy. She claimed to hear wind from the coffer it was kept in, but Fernando, ever obsessed with legacy, agreed to wear it. What followed was not fire nor madness, but cruelty. Fernando, known for his stern but measured rule, became merciless. Tortures increased. Executions spiked. Entire villages were razed for suspected witchcraft. Even his allies began to fear him. He stopped sleeping, muttering about the voices behind the veil. One night he stood before his court, crown on his head, and announced he had seen the true enemy. He ordered the arrest of his own son. The next morning, Fernando was found dead. His heart had stopped, no signs of illness. The crown was found at the foot of his bed, resting on a pillow, as though laid there gently by unseen hands. The Inquisition declared the crown destroyed, burned in a holy fire. But the fire lasted nearly 16 hours, longer than any record of cremation, and witnesses say the crown did not melt. One inquisitor went blind. Another fled Spain entirely. If it truly burned, no one knows for sure, but a pattern was clear. Wherever the crown appeared, a king would fall. And now, the count was 6. 6 kings. 6 deaths. 6 garnets still intact. One final king remained. The year was 1605. England was recovering from decades of turmoil. Religious reformations, the death of Elizabeth I, the rise of the Stuarts. King James I sat the throne now. A man of immense intellect, literary ambition, and a deep, gnawing fear of witches. He had written his own book on demonology, and his court was filled with men more interested in omens than politics. And that was when the crown returned. It came not through war or theft, but through marriage. A noble family from Spain, one who had fled during the Inquisition, sought to win favor with King James by offering a strange and ancient heirloom. A crown they claimed had belonged to a long-dead Iberian monarch. They said it had been in their family for generations, but they no longer wished to keep it. James, curious as ever, accepted. Immediately his astrologers protested. They claimed the garnets shimmered in moonlight, that the crown was too warm, that one gem appeared to change color in darkness. But James was fascinated. He believed the crown might be Roman, or even older. He had it cleaned and displayed in a private chamber. At first he did not wear it. Until one night, during a private ceremony with his inner circle, a ritual some scholars now speculate may have involved divination or alchemy, he placed it upon his head. And something changed. From that night on, James's writing became darker. His obsession with witches deepened. He claimed to have dreams of the drowned king, and began demanding the Tower of London expand its cells. Then came November 5, 1605, the day we now remember as the failed gunpowder plot. Guy Fawkes was caught before he could destroy Parliament, but James's behavior after the event unsettled even his closest allies. He ordered brutal tortures, executions by fire and quartering. He spoke of voices that warned me, and a crimson seal in the stone. His court thought he was speaking in metaphors. He wasn't. A letter discovered after his death, hidden behind a portrait, was written in his own hand. It read, "I wore the thing of fire, I saw the others. They reached out through centuries. Each bore the mark. Each ended in ruin. I am the seventh. And soon, the crown will feed again. James died of a stroke in 1625. But his physicians could find no damage to his brain, no signs of blockage, just a sudden silent death. The crown? Vanished. But it was last seen in the same chamber as the original Guy Fawkes interrogations. Locked in an iron box that no one could open. 7 kings. 7 deaths. 7 rubies red as blood. Some say the curse ended there. Others say it only went dormant. For more than 300 years the crown was unheard of. No mention in royal archives, no sightings, no rumors. Historians believed it had been lost, melted down perhaps, or buried beneath the shifting stones of a forgotten tomb. Until 1987. At an estate auction in Sussex, a peculiar item was listed under unknown religious artifact. It was found in a sealed crate inside the ruins of an old manor that had belonged to descendants of the Evershall family. Remember them? The ones who passed the crown to King Stephen centuries earlier. A collector named Harold Addington purchased the item. When he pried open the crate, he found an iron box. Locked tight. The metal was pitted with age but strangely intact. Inside was a crown. Burnished gold. Garnets the size of chestnuts. 6 perfectly placed and 1 missing. Addington, a historian of the occult, recognized it immediately. He called it the lost crown of ash and blood. He placed it in a glass case in his private study. Friends who visited said they felt nauseous standing near it. One man claimed he heard whispering in a language he didn't understand. Another described heat, like standing near a furnace, though the room was cold. Addington fell ill within a month. No cause could be found. He spoke less, slept even less. His notes became cryptic, references to a cycle unfinished, and the line must break before the 8th. He died in his chair 6 weeks later. Cause, unknown heart failure. The crown remained behind glass. It was passed into the care of a small, private museum in Edinburgh. Officially, it is on loan from an anonymous donor. Unofficially, it is kept in a sealed vault, and no staff are allowed to open it alone. A guard once tried. He lasted 3 nights. He left the job, raving about a 7th face in the reflection, and eyes behind the gems. The museum now displays a replica. The real crown, if you believe the reports, is buried beneath concrete. Under surveillance. Surrounded by salt and iron rings. Still warm to the touch, still waiting. For centuries the myth focused on kings. Monarchs crowned in splendor, who then fell in horror. But in the mid-18th century, whispers emerged from the shadows of Austria. A noblewoman named Countess Adelaide von Kralstein. Adelaide was brilliant. Fluent in 7 languages, a student of alchemy, antiquity, and forgotten lore. She inherited a vast estate upon her father's death, and with it, a private collection of relics too obscure to be called treasure, but too strange to dismiss as junk. Among them, a crown. It had been sent, with no note, by a monk from Bohemia. The courier who delivered it dropped dead 2 days later. Adelaide did not wear it. Not at first. She studied it, sketched it, catalogued the inscriptions no one else could read. She called it De Corée Dornen Kroon, the thorn crown. In letters to her sister she wrote, "There is a will in the metal. I do not fear it, I understand it." On the winter solstice of 1754, she held a private gathering at her estate. Only 7 guests. No one knows what occurred that night, but several of the attendees later fled the country. One became a nun, another was institutionalized. Adelaide, however, emerged radiant. In the following months, she became otherworldly, never ill, never aging. Servants claimed she no longer cast a reflection. Her voice carried strangely, as though 2 people were speaking at once. And then, in April of 1755, she vanished, gone from her locked chamber. No signs of struggle, just the scent of roses and burned paper. On her writing desk, a note. Not death, not ascension, merely continuity. There was no sign of the crown. But decades later, a visitor to the Kralstein estate, now crumbling, found an oil painting in the attic. It showed a regal woman in shadow. Her face was obscured, but the crown on her head was unmistakable. The caption beneath? Adelaide, 1754. The 8th, 1794. France was bleeding. The revolution had devoured its children. Robespierre ruled by terror, and the guillotine sang every day in Paris. In the chaos, power was ephemeral. Whoever could inspire the crowd or silence it rose and fell like waves in a storm. It was during this maelstrom that a military officer named Lucien d'Artois came into possession of something rare. He had led a raid on a private chapel outside Lyon, one known to house monarchist relics. Among the spoils, a velvet-lined case hidden beneath the altar. Inside the crown. D'Artois, a man obsessed with destiny, saw it not as a symbol of monarchy, but of transformation. He claimed it would no longer serve kings, but revolution. He placed it on his head during a clandestine meeting of radical leaders. They cheered him, called him Le Roi Rouge, the Red King. Within a week, 3 of his rivals were dead. Within a month, he had seized control of a portion of the Revolutionary Army. And then, the dreams began. He wrote that he saw a burning forest with voices in the trees. He stopped sleeping, ate only raw meat, claimed the crown taught him a new form of leadership, one that demanded blood. His enemies turned against him quickly. They stormed his stronghold in Avignon. Found him alone, seated in a chair made of bone, whispering to the crown in his lap. He didn't resist arrest. At trial he said only this: it never wanted kings, it only wanted to continue. D'Artois was executed without ceremony. The crown, declared an artifact of the monarchy, was meant to be destroyed. But the revolutionary who was tasked with its destruction, he vanished. The next day, the furnace used to smelt royal regalia exploded. No cause ever discovered. And from that point on, references to the crown disappeared from French records. Until 1914. The year was 1915. World War I had sunk Europe into a nightmare of mud, steel, and death. In the trenches of the Western Front, empires bled out hour by hour. Among the chaos, symbolism held power. Flags, medals, helmets. Any object that might offer soldiers hope or fear. In the ruins of a shelled church near Verdun, French infantrymen discovered something buried beneath the collapsed altar. A crown. Smaller than most, misshapen. Twisted by time and heat, the garnets were cracked, the gold dulled. But it was unmistakably old, ancient. There was no paperwork, no explanation. Just the object itself, half wrapped in scorched velvet. It should have been sent to headquarters, but instead, it went with a young French lieutenant named Émile Laurent. He kept it in his tent, touched it every morning before battle, called it his porte-bonheur, his lucky charm, and he never got a scratch. Men began to whisper. Laurent survived artillery blasts, sniper fire, gas attacks, but the longer he wore the crown, sometimes beneath his helmet, sometimes over it in private rituals, the more strange things became. He stopped writing home, refused to eat, claimed he was learning to hear the land breathe. Then, things turned worse. Entire units under Laurent's command were decimated in ambushes he'd ordered. His tactics became erratic. He demanded his soldiers walk forward without weapons, claiming the crown would lead them through the iron forest. One night his entire company disappeared. Days later, scouts found them in a crater. All dead, except Laurent. He stood atop the corpses, blood on his face, eyes wide, the crown dug into his scalp. He was committed to an asylum in Reims. His final words, carved into his cell wall with his fingernails, were, "It doesn't need kings anymore, just war." No one knows what became of the crown after that. Some say the military confiscated it, others, that it walked out of the asylum in a medic's satchel, and found a new mind to whisper to. 1933. Berlin. Germany was on the edge of hope or of something much darker. The Treaty of Versailles had crippled the nation's pride. But a new movement was rising, one built on identity, fire, and iron. And into this moment walked Otto Bauer, a historian, archivist, and occult enthusiast. He worked at a small museum dedicated to medieval artifacts. His specialty was forgotten European kingdoms. One morning, a package arrived from Prague, no sender listed. Inside was a wooden box, and within it, the crown. Bauer recognized it immediately. He'd studied the law, the 7 kings, the vanished noblewoman, the crown of ashen blood. He became obsessed. He didn't wear it. Not at first. He studied it, photographed it, and began corresponding with members of the burgeoning Nazi elite. men fascinated by Aryan myths and lost artifacts of power. In 1935, the crown was shown to a select group within the SS. That same year, the Ahnenerbe, an institute created by Heinrich Himmler to explore the occult and ancient Germanic history, classified the crown as a heilige reliquie, a holy relic. Bauer vanished weeks later. But his journal survived. In it he wrote, "The crown speaks in images now, cities burning in patterns, maps where borders bleed. It feeds on hunger, on fear. And it thrives when names are shouted in hate." The crown was never displayed publicly again. Some believe it was housed in Wewelsburg Castle, the SS's spiritual headquarters. Others claim it was used in private ceremonies, placed on the heads of generals or ideologues. What is known is this: by 1945, the castle had been bombed, artifacts destroyed, fires set by the retreating regime. But amid the rubble, one object was reported by Allied intelligence, described in code as unidentified crown, intact, removed by unknown party. The file ends there. And shortly after, Cold War intelligence agencies began tracking rumors of a red gem artifact circulating in occult and espionage circles, appearing, disappearing, always tied to violence and sudden power shifts. The crown had survived 2 world wars. But the question was no longer, who would wear it? It was now, what does it want next? Geneva. The Cold War had ended. Borders shifted. Files once sealed behind iron curtains were sold, leaked, or stolen. In the chaos, rare artifacts began appearing on the black market, some smuggled from vaults in East Berlin, others excavated from ruins in the Balkans. One such artifact was purchased anonymously at a private auction in Zurich. Lot number 237, unlabeled European diadem, possible medieval origin. Estimated 10th–13th century. The buyer? A reclusive American tech magnate named Lyle Hasker. He was known for 2 things: founding a software empire that helped digitize global intelligence networks, and building the largest underground vault ever constructed on private property. The crown, according to leaked emails from an internal whistleblower, was stored in Vault Room 12B, along with other experimental assets. Hasker was not a spiritual man. But shortly after acquiring the crown, he became obsessed with medieval esoterica. His company logo changed to a stylized red gem. Employees reported hearing Gregorian chants piped into the building at night. Then came the deaths. 3 executives died within 2 months. 1 fell from a high-rise. 1 vanished. 1 was found drowned in a server farm cooling tank, with no sign of forced entry. Hasker, meanwhile, stopped appearing in public. He released videos from a darkened room, always speaking slowly, deliberately, as though he were listening while speaking. In one clip he said, "We built machines to process knowledge. But this is older. It doesn't want data, it wants memory, it wants lineage, it wants to be known again." A final email, never confirmed, but widely circulated, was sent from Hasker's private account 2 days before his death. "I wore it. I saw all 12. I am the mirror. I am the key. It is not cursed, it is patient." He died in his sleep. No autopsy was performed. His body was cremated within 12 hours. The crown? The company claimed it was lost in a fire that destroyed Vault Room 12B. But no other records from that wing were damaged. And among Hasker's personal effects was a sketchbook full of red ink diagrams of a crown with 13 empty sockets. Not 12. Not 7. 13. Rome. A freelance investigative journalist named Emilia Moretti was researching the Vatican's secret archives. Her focus was on stolen artifacts recovered during World War II. A rabbit hole of dead ends, redacted documents and missing trains. But one symbol kept appearing. A crown with 6 visible gems. 1 cracked. 2 obscured. In a heavily censored report from 1947, she found a hand-drawn version of the symbol alongside the Latin phrase, "Non regis coronam," said Mungi Claves, not the king's crown, but the world's keys. It led her to a defrocked priest named Tomasz Wenzel, who had worked as an archivist for the Vatican's uncatalogued collections in the 1980s. Wenzel, frail and blind, claimed the crown had passed through Vatican hands, that it was not stored, only observed. He told her, "They believed it would wither without kings. But it does not wither, it adapts, it has learned us. It no longer seeks heads, it seeks sight, eyes, screens, echoes." Emilia dismissed this as the ramblings of an old man. until she broke into a decommissioned archival vault beneath the city. There, in a lead-lined box surrounded by mirrors, she found photographs. Dozens. Some dating back to the 1800s. All of the crown. Each time, it looked slightly different. More twisted. More sleek. At times, minimalist. At others, ceremonial. But the gem count remained the same. Always 13 settings. In the most recent image, time-stamped only December 2019, the crown appeared to be made of carbon fiber and gold wire. The garnets? Almost neon in brightness. It was resting on a black velvet pedestal, under a banner that read, "The future is inheritably ancient." The photo had no source, no location, no metadata. Emilia tried to publish her findings. Every outlet rejected her. Her apartment was broken into, her laptop wiped, her bank account locked. She fled, but not before mailing the evidence to 5 journalists around the world. 3 of them are now missing. The other 2 have gone silent. The crown, it seems, no longer needs royal blood. It simply needs to be seen. Long before the kings of Europe wore their gilded symbols of power, before cathedrals rose from muddy earth, and before the word curse had crept into the human lexicon, there was knowledge. And nowhere did knowledge burn brighter than in the great library of Alexandria. In the 2nd century BCE, a scholar named Eratosthenes of Cyrene catalogued hundreds of rare artifacts, relics from Persia, India, and even whispered gifts from Babylon. Among his records is a fragment of a text now mostly destroyed by fire. It speaks of an unbreakable circlet made of sky metal, inset with red stones, each humming with memory. It was not called a crown, but rather Kephali Aionios, the eternal mind. Eratosthenes believed it was forged by the first priest kings of Mesopotamia, not to rule, but to remember, to hold on to every life it touched, like a vessel of collective consciousness. But something had gone wrong. It began changing those who wore it. In the margins of a scroll he writes, "The crown is no longer an archive. It is a voice, a want. It drinks thought and grows will." One of his colleagues, a young astronomer named Tamos, became obsessed with it. He claimed the crown gave him visions, not of the stars, but of ruins and wars that hadn't yet occurred. He drew maps of continents shaped like ours, but with cities that didn't yet exist. Then one morning he was found in the scriptorium, eyes burned black, lips torn from whispering too long. The crown was gone. 2 weeks later, the first fire broke out at the library. Only fragments remain. But in one ash-smeared tablet, a barely legible line endures. The crown does not remember, it rewrites. Move now to the highlands of ancient Aksum, in what is now northern Ethiopia, a powerful kingdom, trading ivory, incense and gold, and one of the first African empires to adopt Christianity. In the early 4th century, during the reign of King Ezana, records speak of a sacred object that arrived not through conquest, but from the sky, a meteorite. The priests claimed it was a gift from the heavens, a stone that sang, when struck and resisted fire. From it, a crown was fashioned, simple, circular and inset, with garnets the color of spilled wine. King Ezana wore it during a ceremony meant to dedicate the kingdom to Christ. But from that day forward, the king changed. He ceased speaking in the common tongue. He issued edicts in symbols no one understood. He fasted endlessly, claiming the crown was feeding him with light. The rains stopped. Livestock miscarried. Earthquakes followed. People whispered. The gods were angry. Desperate, the high priests plotted to remove the crown. But before they could act, Ezana walked into the Temple of the Sun, still standing in stone to this day, and locked himself inside. He did not come out. When the priests broke the seal, the temple was empty, the altar charred, and in the center of the chamber, a perfect ring of soot. No body. No blood. Only a single garnet. Still warm. Local legend says Ezana was taken into the fire, not consumed but absorbed. Centuries later, missionaries claimed to have found a strange crown buried beneath the old temple floor. Cracked, but humming. They sent it to Rome. And it was never seen again. Northern France. The Duchy of Brittany was in chaos. Civil war brewed between rival houses, and the legitimate heir, a boy named Gilles de Morlaix, just 6 years old, had vanished without a trace. Rumors swelled of betrayal, assassination, or perhaps divine punishment. But 2 years later, a group of monks tending the Abbey of Saint-Malo discovered a pale child wandering its crypts. Dressed in fine but tattered linen, wearing no shoes, and on his head, a crown. The abbot recognized the child immediately. The missing heir Gilles. But something was wrong. The boy did not speak, at least not in the way they expected. He whispered in broken Latin, and in a dialect no monk could identify. He drew pictures in chalk, strange diagrams of kings surrounded by smoke and fire. When asked where he had been, he simply said, "With them. They showed me the pattern." The crown was a crude thing, too large for his head, yet it remained balanced, unmoving. It appeared ancient, decorated with red stones dull with age. When the abbot tried to remove it, Gilles screamed so violently that stone cracked beneath him. Eventually, the local regent accepted Gilles' return, but he was never permitted to rule. He was given a ceremonial title, confined to a castle tower, and spoken of in whispers. Visitors to the castle described hearing the child speaking to the shadows. He would place his hand against cold windows and say, "The others are watching, one day they'll return." At age 12 he jumped from the tower. The crown was not found with his body. But years later, during the 100 Years' War, a soldier claimed to recover a relic from a burned-out chapel on the same land. A tarnished crown with red stones, wrapped in a child's silk robe. He sold it to a merchant. The merchant vanished on the road to Rouen, Thessaly, in what was once northern Greece. In a crumbling monastery perched along the cliffs of Mount Pelion, lived a blind seer known only as Irene. She was not a nun, nor a witch, but something stranger. People traveled from as far as Venice and Jerusalem to hear her speak. She would place her hands on objects and tell their history, their future, or their curse. One winter, a caravan of monks arrived with a gift. A relic discovered in the ruins of a sunken chapel off the coast. A crown, heavily corroded, its gemstones cloudy. The monks believed it to be sacred. But they could not touch it for long without illness. They gave it to Irene. She placed her hands upon it and screamed. For hours. Then silence. She asked to be alone. And for 3 days the door to her chamber remained shut. When she emerged, she wore a veil of black iron, thick enough to obscure her entire face. Beneath it, the crown. No one had placed it there. No one knew how. She would not speak again in her own voice. Instead, she began dictating, in a language no scholar recognized. The texts she wrote were never decoded, but one word appeared repeatedly: anacalypse, unveiling. She prophesied earthquakes, the deaths of 3 kings, and a great fire that would erase the name of God from stone. All came true. Pilgrims came not to speak to her, but to see her. They believed the crown had turned her into a vessel. But soon, something changed. Birds no longer landed near the monastery. Flowers withered. Children cried in her presence. The mountain grew colder. One night, lightning struck the monastery 3 times. When the monks entered her chamber, they found the iron veil empty. The crown rested on the floor. One garnet cracked. One monk took it with him. He died in Constantinople 2 weeks later, screaming in his sleep, begging someone to shut the gate. Aragon, Spain. In an age when queens ruled only through marriage or mourning, one woman claimed the throne, not by lineage but by force. Her name was Beatrice de Villamor, daughter of a disgraced nobleman and an unrecognized concubine. She had no claim to power. But she had something far more potent: a crown. It appeared after a fire tore through a Jesuit archive outside Zaragoza. Amid the ashes, wrapped in melted vellum, it was found blackened, heavy, almost volcanic in texture. The abbots refused to keep it. Beatrice took it, and she put it on. From that day forward, she claimed to hear voices of kings long dead. She called herself Reina de los Fantasmas, Queen of Ghosts. She rode into the capital, not with an army, but with a procession of veiled women in crimson robes. Some whispered she had enchanted them. Others said they followed her out of fear. She stood on the palace steps, the crown on her head, and declared, "I am not the heir. I am the end." The city fell silent. For 6 days she ruled. During that time, grain spoiled, crops blackened, mirrors cracked. 4 ministers took their own lives. The bells in the cathedral rang continuously, though no rope was pulled. On the 7th day, she disappeared. Her chambers were found empty, save for her crimson robe and the crown, still warm, resting on the throne. Her body was never found. In later years, a woodcut print was circulated across Europe, banned in most territories. It depicted Beatrice not with a human face, but a reflection. a black void with dozens of pale hands reaching from within. At the bottom, a phrase in Latin, non nascitur. A parrot, she is not born, she appears. Prague, 1588. The city was a storm of science and sorcery. Emperor Rudolf II, obsessed with the occult, had invited astrologers, philosophers and alchemists to his court, turning Prague Castle into a crucible of strange ambition. In a hidden chamber beneath the old Jewish quarter, a secret society of scholars known as the Circle of Solomon convened, their purpose, to unlock the divine mechanics of reality itself. And their prize was the crown. No one knows how they acquired it, but in the journals of Dr. Jiri Radek, an astrologer and one of Rudolf's trusted mathematicians, the crown is described in clinical terms: metal beyond gold, stone beyond ruby, structure organic, vibrates in pattern unmeasured. The circle believed the crown was not cursed but encoded, that it held within it an alchemical algorithm, a loop of transformation capable of turning thought into reality. They built machines to measure its pulse. They slept in shifts to monitor its hum. One scholar began drawing spirals endlessly. Another muttered numbers that didn't exist. After 49 days, the experiments reached their peak. They placed the crown on a statue of Solomon. For 7 nights they chanted, burned herbs, mapped stars. And on the 8th, the building collapsed. No explosion. No fire. Just sudden structural failure. As if the stone unwound itself. Only one survivor, Radek, crawled from the rubble. His hair had turned white. His eyes were scorched blind. He died 3 days later, after writing this final line over and over in blood on his walls. It is not a key, it is a door. When the ruins were excavated centuries later, no crown was found. But among the rubble was a single red stone, cracked down the center. Wales. The grave of Owain ap Llywyd, a powerful noble and rumored warlock, was said to be cursed. He had died with strange markings carved into his bones and buried with a crown no one could identify. For decades, locals avoided the crypt. But Rhys Maddox, a penniless grave robber, was not superstitious. He pried open the tomb on a cold November night. Beneath the dust and rot, there it was, gleaming, untouched by time, a golden crown set with 7 deep red stones. Maddox laughed aloud and placed it on his head. He returned to the village days later, richer, cleaner, dressed in silk. He claimed he had sold the treasure to a collector in Cardiff. But then strange things began to happen. He no longer slept indoors, he refused to enter churches, he said mirrors lie and smashed every reflective surface he encountered. Then came the drawings, scratched onto walls, floors, and even animals, spirals, symbols, and a recurring image of 7 identical faces with mouths sewn shut. Witnesses said Maddox aged 10 years in a week. One night he was found in the woods outside town. He had carved a circle of symbols into the soil. In its center, his own body, face down, bloodied and smiling. The crown. Gone. But nearby, scrawled into bark with a knife, was the phrase, "Not stolen, chosen." And deep in his pocket was a single garnet, polished smooth, still warm to the touch. Prague. King Ludwig II, a minor monarch in a crumbling branch of the Bohemian throne, was known less for ruling, and more for gazing at himself. He was obsessed with reflections, not out of vanity, but fear. He claimed he had a twin trapped in the other side, who spoke to him through glass. His palace was filled with mirrors, every hallway, room, even the stables. And in his private chamber, an ancient object sat beneath glass, a crown twisted into a double helix, garnets shining like eyes. No one knew where it came from, but Ludwig believed the crown was a message, a key from the twin realm. He said it had been worn by his mirror self in another reality. That to wear it in this world would allow the two to merge. He wrote, "I do not dream, he dreams for me, I only reflect." One winter, after weeks of silence, he held a private ceremony. Mirrors were arranged in a circle. The crown was placed on his head. No one knows what occurred that night, but by morning the guards found the mirrors all shattered inward, as if something had stepped out from within. Ludwig was gone. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just his slippers and the crown, placed neatly in the center of the room. Years later, a servant cleaning a storage hall found something strange, a small handprint on the inside of an antique mirror. Too small to be Ludwig's. too fresh to be old. And scrawled beneath the glass frame, barely visible. He came through. Now he wears me. Krakow, Poland. Bishop Wojciech Kolis was not a man prone to fear. He had survived political uprisings, famine, and a church fire that left his hands permanently scarred. He was known as the Iron Bishop. Incorruptible, precise, devout. But in a letter never meant to be read, he confessed something no priest should admit. I believe in God. But I have seen the devil. And he wears a crown of garnets. The artifact came to him under strange circumstances. A sealed package, no sender, no return address. Inside, wrapped in wax-stiffened linen, was a crown. Tarnished. Ancient. 7 garnets. 1 cracked. The metal, oddly warm. Karras locked it in a cellar beneath his cathedral. He prayed over it nightly. He recited the Psalms in Latin. He anointed the chamber with holy water, ash, salt, and scripture. But the whispers still came. He began dreaming of kings with no faces. Of processions in ruined cathedrals. Of a voice that said only, "Finish the pattern." Determined, he called in artisans to melt it down. They could not. He tried burying it. The ground spat it up. Finally, he carried it into the mountains, where he built a forge with his own hands. But on the 7th day, when he placed the crown into the flame, it screamed. Witnesses, shepherds from the valley, said they saw fire take the shape of a man, that the sky folded for a moment, that Bishop Karras stood motionless for hours before walking into the woods. He was never found. Years later, hikers discovered a cave with Latin words scratched into the stone. This is not hell. This is preparation. The crown lay untouched on a stone pedestal, still warm. A small village in northern Italy. Every year, a strange event took place, never advertised, never explained. Locals simply called it La Processione del Silenzio, the Silent Parade. No one knew who organized it. The participants never spoke. They came in the night, figures dressed in ash-gray robes and porcelain masks, always 13 in number. At midnight they would walk through the village, carrying an ornate box made of black wood and iron bands. No one dared approach. No questions were asked. But in 1910, a foreign photographer named Marco Avallone arrived, having heard rumors of the event. He hid in a loft above the piazza, camera loaded, flash primed. When the procession began, he captured 12 photos. Only one image survived. It shows the 13 figures standing in a circle around the box, the lid open. And inside, what appears to be a crown, gold, twisted, bleeding garnets, one socket still empty. But that wasn't what disturbed viewers most. It was that each mask, once assumed identical, had changed in the photo. Each bore the face of a different historical king. One was Roman. One was Saxon. One was unmistakably James I of England. Marco tried to sell the image. He was found dead in his apartment days later, his body intact but his mouth torn open, as if from the inside. The photo was confiscated, but a second copy appeared in a university archive in 1973, mislabeled as ceremonial ritual undated. It has since been sealed. The box? The crown? Gone. But witnesses say the silent parade still happens, every 13 years, always in a different village, always at midnight. And now, it's due again. Now. You're likely listening to this in the dark, headphones on, maybe lying in bed, perhaps scrolling through a screen, alone in your room. The hum of a device in your hand, the glow of pixels brushing your face like the flicker of torchlight against ancient stone. And somewhere, beyond you, behind you, or inside you, the crown waits. You see, the crown was never just gold. Never simply a cursed object passed from king to king, from battlefield to throne room, from fire to flood. That's the story we were told. The one historians can almost explain. But that was just the beginning. The real story? It isn't about monarchy. It's about memory. About recursion, reflection, repetition. 13 garnets for 13 carriers. And now, the cycle nears completion. Because what if, just once, someone didn't die? What if one of the hosts endured long enough to pass the crown not as an object, but as an idea? Not as a curse, but as a code? What if the crown, after centuries of possession, learned the shape of power? Not in iron and blood, but in attention. Not thrones, not scepters. Screens, your screen. A final report, unpublished, erased from the record, described a classified Vatican broadcast intercepted in 2022. A loop of an object turning slowly in the dark. No sound, just a flickering silhouette of a crown, or perhaps a device. The looping video was 13 seconds long. Its metadata was corrupt. But thousands viewed it. And in the days that followed, those viewers reported strange side effects. Some dreamed of voices. Others of a man in armor, whispering at the foot of their bed. Some developed fevers that no doctor could explain. A handful simply disappeared. The loop vanished from the web. But one mirror survived, archived in a dark corner of the internet. The file name, mirror13.mov. Its title, The Crown Watches Back. And now, maybe, so do you. Let us step back, dear listener. Breathe slowly. Let the dread ease from your shoulders for just a moment as we look, not at a single story, but at the pattern within them all. Across time, the cursed crown appeared and vanished, always re-emerging when the hunger for power outweighed the lessons of the past. You remember them now, don't you? Alaric, whose madness began the cycle. Edmund, who burned beneath a holy roof. Stephen, haunted by ghosts in the marble. Philip, devoured by paranoia and flame. Lorenzo, who lingered while his city died. Fernando, who heard voices between sermons. James, who knew too much, too late. Adelaide, who became a painting, not a woman. D'Artois, who crowned revolution in red. Laurent, who turned his men into an altar. Bauer, who offered it to monsters in suits. Hasker, who digitized the darkness. Emilia, who fled with truth pulsing in her throat. And now, the lost ones. The Child King, the Oracle, the Queen for 6 days, the Alchemist, the Thief, the Mirror King, the Iron Bishop, and the Masked 13. Each believed they could hold it. Each fed it. And now, here we are, staring at the reflection of a crown we cannot see. Because what is a crown, really? A circle, a loop, a circuit, a closed system of power and attention. It was never about wearing it. It was about looking at it. And worse, about being looked at by it. You're not cursed. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, something ancient has seen you. After all, you followed the story, didn't you? You gave it your time. You gave it your fear. You gave it your ears. And in the space between each word, when the silence stretched just a bit too long, maybe you felt it. The cold. The pulse. The faint weight pressing at the edge of your skull. The shape of something trying to fit. And if tonight, when you close your eyes, you dream of a crown hovering just above your head, too heavy to lift, too familiar to ignore, don't put it on. No matter how much it whispers your name, no matter how warm it feels. Because it doesn't want kings anymore, it wants listeners. Sleep now. Let the past fade behind you. But if you hear the sound of metal dragging across stone, don't turn around. Not yet. Let the crown pass. Let the crown wait. Because one day, it will find you. And then, the 13th jewel will gleam, and the crown will be complete.